You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today. We have another amazing show line for you all. Go to IamRefocusedRadio.com, by the way, because this episode will be on there and anywhere you find your podcast. And first and foremost, when you come to the show, we want to say thank you for taking time to tune in to the show, because the show is nothing without the listeners and viewers. And you asking, why should I taking time to do this? Because, you know, you always hear me brag about my amazing guests, like we have Tom French here. But I want to take some time and say thank you to the listeners and the viewers, because without y'all, like, there's no point of the show going. So I want to take the time, switch gears a little bit, through the curveball, because I usually have a big intro for our guests. But I just want to take time to say for our listeners, our viewers, thank you so much for all your support throughout the years. On air since 2019, it's not an easy task. And without supporters like y'all, we wouldn't be here. So let's get to business. We have our special guest, Tom French. Instead of slowing down after retiring at 60, he designed his own gap year, and that turned into a great adventure that we're going to be getting into, including the amazing book that he wrote, The Gap Years, Climbing, Skiing, and the Journey Back. We're going to have a great time with our special guest. So first and foremost, Tom, I want to say thank you for being on the show today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Shamaya. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being on. So after 30 years as a business executive, you had an amazing career. What made you decide that it was time for a new thing to happen, specifically take a gap year at 60?
Well, there were a couple of things that went into that. Part of it was forced on me. The firm I worked with set it up so you left by the time you turned 60. So I knew that was coming, and I knew turning 60 was coming, and it was going to be time to do something else. The normal set of something else's that I would have thought about, or people like me thought about, were continuing in business. And I had a whole bunch of opportunities to do other exciting things in business. So the part that was sort of new, I knew I was going to do something different. But when presented with that opportunity, I kind of slowed down and said, hey, wait a minute, this just feels a little different. I got a chance to do something, just to head a different direction if I want to for a while. And the more I thought about that, the more I started thinking back to other times in my life when I had taken a break. And I did that more than once. I took they weren't called gap years then, but before I went to college, I took a year off and spent it living on the Arctic Circle in northern Sweden. And then I got out of college, and instead of doing the normal thing, I ended up taking 3 years off and traveling around the world, planning and leading expedition trips. And those years, when I sort of stepped out of it all, ended up being some of the most meaningful years of my life. So here I was at 60 saying, man, if it worked back then, I feel like it could work again. And I also had these interests, things I had done growing up that were real passions growing up. One of them was mountaineering, another was cross-country ski racing, and I'd sort of gotten away from it for understandable reasons. I was busy having a business career, busy raising a family that I love very much and felt very good about, but it all sort of came together, and I said, I think I want to take a break and see what a gap year feels like at 60. And I also want to see what some of those things that meant so much to me in my teens and early 20s, what's it like to come at them as a 60-year-old? Is the juice still there? Isn't it there? What's it like to do it then? And I wanted to reconnect with them and see. So that sort of all got into the hopper, and I ended up saying, hey, I branded it a gap year. I knew it was going to be initially the plan. It changed, but it was going to be about a year and a half. But gap year sounded like a nice way to describe it. And I said, I'm just going to take a break from everything. I'm going to take a sabbatical from some boards I was on. I'm going to tell some companies that are talking to me, will come back and talk to me in a year and a half, and then go off and do what I call the gap year. That's sort of how I found myself there.
Sound like you had a rewarding career and you had some rich memories. Let's talk about the climbing, because kind of illustrate for the audience what it's like to go on a trip like that, because I could only imagine you got to be a little bit organized. It's not just something you wing and say, I get up one day and just do it. You had to probably plan some things out for safety and, precaution, all that. Tell us about your experience climbing mountains and what does that actually feel like when you're doing stuff like that?
Yeah, no, you're right. And there's a lot that does go into it. And maybe even you could argue some things you can get out of your business life that apply. But, these were a lot of the mountains I had climbed growing up and that I was going back at were some of the largest mountains in the world. You're on them. It takes a couple of months frequently by the time you get yourself there and walk into the base camp and spend a lot of time on the mountain to get yourself used to the altitude, which is extreme. So these are multiple month commitments frequently, or a short one might be a month, what I was doing. Others were two plus. So to your point, it starts way before you even leave. There's first getting your body in shape. And for the biggest mountains, that's a minimum of a year, if not two, really working every day methodically to get your body ready to be subjected to extreme stress for days after days after days. And by the way, the older you are, when you're 60 years old, that feels a little different than it used to when you were 25 years old. So there's all that. And then you finally get your body ready for it. Then you got to get all your equipment ready, and you got to get your life ready. And there's all this planning and logistics, and every bit of your gear has to work. You have to know what it is. You have to pick it, think about it, get used to it. You got to get it all organized because it's going to be keeping you alive, and you're going to be living with it in extreme environments for days and weeks. Then you got to get all that stuff in duffel bags and get yourself on a plane and leave your normal life for 2 months. So there's a fair amount of just organizing your life so you can step out of your life. That takes a ton of energy. And all that I just described is before you even get in the mountain. Then you sort of finally get there, and then you start walking. Typically, at a lot of these places I was going, it was 1 or 2 or 3 weeks of walking to get to the base of the mountain. In some instances, through really, really remote terrain. Some terrain we barely were seeing other people, if at all. And then you get on the mountain, and it depends on the mountain, but there's a whole lot of the biggest mountains, your body doesn't want to be there physiologically. So you've got to spend days training your body, acclimating, basically growing red blood cells so you can survive at altitude. So you're doing a lot of climbing partway up the mountain and then back down and resting, and further up the mountain and then coming down again and putting a route in and establishing camps higher and higher on the mountain that have tents and fuel and oxygen bottles and all the things you need higher up. So it's this massive logistical operation and just time spent getting ready. So if you can picture all that, finally, when you've done all that, then maybe it's time to go for the summit. And that's, you're sort of often waiting. You need the weather to be just right. So you're often sitting there waiting because the winds have to drop. You can't go near the summits of some of these mountains except in ideal conditions, which happen occasionally. So you're watching and waiting and watching and waiting, and finally like, okay, it's go time. And on the biggest mountains, go time, it might be 5 or 6 days of continuous climbing now to get to the top of this mountain and a few more days back down. But that's on top of everything else I just described. So you're right. A whole lot goes into it, both getting your body and your life and your mind, frankly, ready for it, and then just being on the mountain day in, day out. And I guess I didn't really talk, I could if you want me to, about the day-to-day experience of being on the mountain. That's a whole nother thing, just dealing with how life feels at altitude. But yeah, that's kind of what goes on.
Once again, let's Refocus Radio, talking to our special guest today, Tom French, and also his book, The Gap Years, Climbing, Skiing, and the Journey Back. I wanted to go that route because I like to throw curveballs on the show and ask different questions, but I couldn't help but to think, man, this is his life. This is not something he just woke up randomly and said, you know what, I think this might be a good idea. Let me just give this a shot. No, this is something he was looking forward towards. And I'm a visual person. I can't help to think that you can make this mountain experience like a life experience. Like life has a lot of unexpected twists and turns, a lot of obstacles that come out of the way. But to your point, we talk about the tools you need, being organized, being prepared, being able to adapt to certain situations. And it's not something that you just snap your fingers and today was perfect, the next day is perfect. No, you had to make adjustments along the way. Talk a little bit to that point, because someone on the outside looking in might think, oh, what's the really big deal? He just kind of planned to climb something. Most people know it's not easy, but most people at the same token may not understand fully how much it takes out of you to experience this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are a couple of different ways to think about that. One is just the day-to-day becomes a mental game as much as a physical game, because your body's miserable. You feel nauseous. You feel like you have the flu a lot of times when you're high up at altitude. You're not eating well. You're out of energy, and you're just debilitated. So there's a whole just process by which you keep yourself calm and comfortable in what isn't a comfortable environment. Up high in these tents, it might be 30 below zero outside the tent. So just picture like getting up to go out to relieve yourself when it's 30 below zero and, you're panting just to put your boots on. I mean, that's a major ordeal. So there's all this, just getting your mind around getting through the little details of life, eating and brushing your teeth and staying warm in your sleeping bag. So there's all that. Then to your point also, things change on you. So you don't control a lot of things. You don't control your own health. And often people get sick on mountains for a variety of reasons. And so you're in a hostile environment, then all of a sudden you got massive stomach upset and you don't know how to get rid of that. And your body doesn't get rid of it well at altitude. It takes way longer to recover. All right, you got to deal with that. Or weather. You do not control the weather, and the weather is extreme. So when I was on Everest, which I was twice, first time we were on Everest, everything was going absolutely great. My body was delivering. The team was doing well. We were tracking to get high on the mountain. And then, this is unheard of, not one, but two cyclones hit the mountain. One would be a rarity. It happens, but two in a climbing season, one came through 6 days. It's just a blizzard and you're just hunkered down in your tent waiting for it to pass. Then you think you're done. You come out, you start climbing again, and wham, here comes a second one. And all of a sudden, you've been planning for this for 2 years. And it's all sort of going out the window, and you have to rearrange everything, your timing, and just think about, can you even get near the top of the mountain now? Do you have to just abandon the climb? So there's a whole lot of reset going on constantly, and mental reset, and sort of just saying to yourself, okay, well, this is my new reality. A little bit, this is what I'm going to define as success, or I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm not going to define this as failure. I'm just going to say I did the best I could, and a bunch of things were outside of my control, and I'm going to deal with them the best way I can. So that's really a lot of what the magic of climbing is, in a way, or I think it's what you're trying to get at. There's the straightforward, it's hard to pull yourself up an ice cliff and that looks dramatic. And it's really hard to struggle up a steep snow wall. But all these variables about dealing with uncertainty and dealing with your own body reacting in ways you don't understand, dealing with your own mind and emotions reacting in ways you don't understand. That's the ultimate challenge, sort of managing your way through all of that and sort of staying level-headed, I would say.
And with this are also pretty amazing memories. Were there any times that stuck out to you where you were able to go with maybe a special person on these journeys? And if so, what kind of memories come to mind, and how has that impact your life as far as memories or whatever that comes to mind with the story?
Yeah, I'll give you two very different ones, because I was fortunate to climb with a lot of very special people on these mountains. By the way, my gap year and a half ended up becoming 3 years for a whole set of reasons, which I write about in the book. So this ended up being 3 years of all this stuff for a set of reasons. And I was blessed. They were just phenomenal experiences that I treasure, and time spent in wonderfully unique environments with people I treasured. So I'll give you two very different examples of ones that made an impact on me. So right at the start of all this, I was climbing down in Antarctica. I was climbing the highest mountain in the middle of Antarctica. And along on that trip was one of our team members, was a guy named Don Cash, who, when he got off of the mountain in Antarctica, he headed off to Everest. I went to Everest 2 years later, but Don went off to Everest. It was going to be the last of his big climbs. I was at home watching him when he was going for the summit. I was watching his little satellite beacon that could show where he was. I was sitting at home in the United States, and it was taking him longer and longer and longer, but he finally got to the top, and here I am watching him way back when. And then the beacon sort of stopped, and I couldn't figure out what's going on here. And it turns out what went on, Don got to the summit of Everest. This was his life dream, raised his hands in triumph and collapsed, and basically never got up again. They got him back on his feet. He started moving. Then he collapsed again, and that was it. And the reason I say all that, by the way, like a lot of the bodies on Everest, they stay there. They can't get him down. It's just too high up. So Don's up there. And when I climbed Everest, I knew I was going to climb right by him. So, part of my final steps to the top of Everest, my lifelong dream, was climbing right by the frozen body of a guy who had become a close friend and teammate on a mountain a couple of years ago. So that's one kind of relationship that makes an impression on you. It also brings home a whole lot about what you're up to and sort of the risks you're buying into to do this. And does that make sense or not? Now, here's a whole different one that's a lot more heartwarming than that one. That one, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't think you'd call it heartwarming. But although I will say, passing Don felt appropriate to me. I was paying tribute to him. It was that's how it felt to me. It felt like a moment of connection with him and his dreams and his spirit. That's what he would have wanted. That I felt honestly good about that thing. All right. Fast forward a couple of years. I ended up the last big mountain I climbed in all this was a peak right near Everest. No one's heard of it. It's not the highest in the world, but it's much harder than Everest, frankly. It turns out I was on it with my daughter, who at the time was 28 years old. She'd become quite a climber in her own right. She'd spent an entire year traveling all around the world, climbing mountains, and she ended up in Nepal. And I was like, hey, I'm climbing this mountain in Nepal, and you want to come? And she said, I do. That's the perfect last thing I'm going to do at the end of my year. So this was a dad's dream come true. I was on this mountain in Nepal with 3 other super experienced climbers, and then one of them was my adult daughter. And the whole experience of doing something I love and just means so much to me on so many dimensions, but doing it with my daughter, my child, who's an adult. So, we were participating as peers in a lot of ways. And she was getting out of it as an adult, the things she got out of it. And I was watching her getting those things out of it. And a lot of them were the same things that I was getting out of it. And I just can't think of too many times in my life I'm going to be able to spend a month in that kind of environment, side by side, with one of my adult children, sharing something that is that intensely meaningful to me. So that was a gift on a whole nother dimension. And I didn't even plan on that going into it. That just sort of happened. That would be a second. I could give you 10 different, at least 10 different people that made a huge impression on me or moments, but those are two very different ones.
Once again, listen to OmniFocus Radio, and you can catch this episode on omnifocusradio.com or anywhere you can find a podcast, and also on airways. We're talking to our special guest, Tom Finch, and also about the book, The Gap Years, Climbing, Skiing, and the Journey Back. Let's talk about Journey Back. When it's time to leave, you did the hardest part. What is the journey back? What was it really like? Was it tricky just as getting up to the mountain, or was it easy? What was the experience from your point of view?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked. And the journey back, it's in the book title because there's a bunch of different journey backs going on, meaning different things. So you could say, well, one journey back is just the journey back to things that he used to do for the 60-year-old guy. And that's a journey back because I had been, an accomplished mountaineer and an accomplished cross-country ski racer in my youth. And now I was going back to those. But I had a 60-year-old body that had been in the business world for 33 years. And I had to get that body ready to do what I was just describing. So there was a journey back that was just getting this old man's body in shape to be able to go do. I don't think I'm that old, but I certainly wasn't young. And I had to get it. And by the way, I did all the research. A 60-year-old body is slower than a 30-year-old body. It just on a bunch of dimensions doesn't perform as well. I researched them. The death rates are much higher on the mountains for the older climbers. So there was this whole journey back. Like, how am I going to get back to a place I can ski a ski marathon for 3 hours really hard and do well, or survive on these big mountains? So that was one kind of journey back. And actually was awesome. That was really fulfilling to learn how to get my body back and get back into these things that I'd once been super good at, but that I'd gotten away from. And I just needed to be patient. I needed to get a lot of help. I needed to research it a lot. I needed to take the time. There are other journey backs, though. So another journey back was just, what's it like to reconnect with stuff that meant so much to you in your youth or your past? And these things drove who I became as a person. They were my source of, not quite self-worth, but joy, fulfillment, who I became as an adult. But they were kind of like back there in my past is how I thought about it. And now I had this opportunity to jump back into them. And well, what was it like, that identity or those experiences that shaped me then? And what was it like to relive them a little bit, except live them as a 60-year-old? So that's a different kind of journey back. It was sort of going back in time, except I'm really not going back in time. I'm just reliving them in the present. I would say that was a journey back. And then there was even yet others, because some of these were in places that meant a lot to me. So, growing up, I had spent a lot of time in Nepal, climbing a lot of mountains and kayaking a lot of rivers, and I fell in love with that country. And here it is in my head as this magical place that I spent formative times in my early 20s and I hadn't been to in 30 years. And now it's going back and reconnecting with this place and these valleys and these mountains and these villages and these people. And all right, what's the same about that? What's different? Has the place changed in 33 years? Or what does it feel to be in a place that was so intensely meaningful to me? And it wasn't only Nepal, mountains of New Hampshire and Vermont, where I grew up skiing and hiking and running. And to get myself ready for this journey back, I was back on those same mountains again, those same trails 30 years later, 40 years later. So I don't know if that gets at what you're asking about, but there were a lot of different journey backs. And that's really what drove the meaning in this whole thing for me, was kind of all of those journeys at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I like that, because when you think about life, just as a metaphor, climbing that mountain, the journey to get there, and then looking back and revisiting some of the moments that are part of the journey, that were part of the journey. They're, like they would say, mile markers on the road. They mark specific feelings, experiences, and you know the exact moment in time. Fill in the blank. We all have those moments in life where we can revisit that moment and we can almost relive it, because we know that powerful moment is like something that's etched in history forever. You just don't forget those key things, and those key things is what make the story great. It's those crazy times that make you laugh, like, wow, we survived that, or man, we really went through that one. Those situations is what makes us. Without those things, then what do we really have?
Man, I couldn't agree with you more. And the other thing, so everything you said, I agree with and I live. And on top of that, for me, was the realization that they're still there. Like, it's not only that those milestones or those memories are back there and they happened once, at least for me, I could go back to them and jump back into them. That was maybe one of my big learnings, that if I chose to, they were still there for me to re-access, 40 years later. And that was just such a gift.
You are still doing incredible work. You are still making things happen with nonprofit board work. You're doing even more amazing memory creation, if I can put it in that perspective. What do you appreciate being able to be exposed to those moments of being top of the mountain, coming back down from the mountain? How has that given you some value in how you look at life, in meaning, like when you think about meaning of life, purpose of life? How has those activities help keep you grounded and see things a certain way?
Yeah, it has. Maybe that's been the ultimate gift of this whole thing to me, which is that it has given me an understanding and a purpose and a meaning and a little bit of a map for what's left in my years, if you will. And, one of those is just, you grow. I grew as a person in these experiences, and the ability to take those learnings. And it's just neat to be in your 60s and feel like you're still growing and still learning. And like, I so intensely grew and learned, and I think got to be a better person doing these things. So one thing is just, you come down from that mountain, I did, and I felt like I could be a better person, apply some of these things that I'd acquired in these new learnings. And I can feel it day to day. It doesn't mean I always succeed, but I can picture what I should be doing and do more of it. So that's one of them. Another was the ability to share that with other people. That was like a total surprise to me. But, I started writing about this and people were actually interested. And I had these experiences and they got value out of hearing about them. And that was immensely gratifying to be able to share with other people, not only some of what I'd learned, but some of what I'd done. And that's like a different set of purpose. It's become a purpose. I mean, writing this book became a purpose, which was just put out there experiences that I thought were apparently what I was realizing were relevant to other people as well and meaningful to other people and share it with them. Falling right out of that, I wrote this book. I'm donating 100% of my proceeds to the Himalayan Trust, which is a nonprofit that does amazing work for the Sherpa people of Nepal. It builds hospitals, builds schools. And so there's a whole nother way, which is just, I walked through those villages, saw those hospitals, met people who the only reason they had a livelihood because they went to those schools that this foundation had put in place. And so there's this whole other thing, which is here, I stumbled into this. That's not what I was thinking when I retired from 33 years in business, but here I am now writing a book, and the book can become a flywheel for flowing funds back to this cause. It's based in New Zealand, by the way. It does all its work in Nepal. And so that's yet another sense of purpose that I'm feeling, if that makes any sense. So all these things I didn't go into it picturing what they would be, but all of them came down the mountain with me, if you will. And that was, again, a very happy surprise.
I like that. That's a powerful statement. And that leads up to my next question is, when you look at all the adventures that you've been able to experience in life, these adventures of unexpected things can happen at any moment and you just adjust and keep moving along. How does your family feel about your adventures? Or were they excited about you saying, hey, I saw your daughter, but were they on the board with you going these big adventures?
To varying degrees, and it is a big ask, right? It's a really big ask when you, particularly I think of a spouse like my wife, Jill, where it's like, hey, honey, I'm going to go away for 2 months. And I'm not only going to go away for 2 months, I'm going to be halfway around the world. And half the time you can't even reach me. I mean, there's no internet, there's no nothing. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be at 27,000 feet on a mountain that kills people. And so that's a huge ask. And, a little bit to the point that occasionally I'd lie there in my sleeping bag and going, how selfish am I being here? I mean, I'm so glad I'm here, but look at the nature of the ask. So, but I would say overall, and it varies by family member, bless them, the starting point was support. I think and that includes my sisters, that includes my 93-year-old father who's still alive, that includes our 3 children. They all get how much this means to me and what it does for me, and therefore they're happy for me, and therefore they want me to be able to live my dreams and seek that sense of learning and fulfillment. And I'm grateful to them that they think about it that way. I think then to varying degrees, they bump up against aspects of that just gives them discomfort. And I think the biggest one really is the risk. When you climb mountains that kill people, and I was on mountains that were killing people they kill them every year. And I was on the mountain when people were dying around me. And at that level, there's some amount of you're just rolling the dice with your own life. But it's one thing to roll the dice on your own life, but you're doing that on others are impacted by the choices you're making. So my wife, Jill, who's been amazingly supportive of me doing this, absolutely hated the fact that I was doing some of the climbs I was doing. And she should have. It scared the heck out of her. She had no control over it. And it worried, she had to be at home worried about stuff I was doing that she couldn't control one way or the other. But she was great. She just said, look, I got to let you be you. I got to live with that and let's get through it, which we did, thank heavens. So all in all, it was positive. I am amazingly grateful to all of them for encouraging me and supporting me, and also for putting up with me in times that I was basically, asking a little bit of them, putting them in places that were uncomfortable.
Once again, this is Refocus Radio, and watching us online, go to imrefocusedradio.com to listen to this episode and find podcasts. Find it on the podcast. We're talking to our special guest, Tom French. Go get a copy of the book. It's available right now. You can get it right now. The Gap Years, Climbing, Skiing, and the Journey Back. Before we let you go officially, if you have one last thing you want to share our viewers, our listeners, what would you like to share with them?
Oh boy. I think, and it's partly what I alluded to, but this sense that you can be wherever you're at in life, and in my case, you're hitting your 60s and you're hitting what we would call retirement, and there's so much still out there, and it can be, as I said before, things that you've always wanted to do but haven't gotten to yet, or it could be things you did that were really meaningful and fulfilling, and you think they're in your past and they're over and done, but they're not necessarily. And that doesn't have to be mountains. It doesn't have to be, it can be skiing. It can be anything. It can be art. It can be reading. It can be knitting. It can be farming. It can be driving, whatever the interests are. It's just so clear to me the power of going back into those and reconnecting with those, and how intensely fulfilling that is. I've had 3, 4, 5 of the absolute most fulfilling years of my life in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Like, how wonderful is that? And the fact that that's still there. So, yeah, I guess if there were one thing, the book is a lot about a lot of details on climbing these big mountains and what it's like on Everest and what it's like in these other mountains and what it's like in these big long ski races. But really what I was trying to write about was what you're asking about, or that's what I would want people to take away from it, because I think that applies to anybody, whatever their interest is.
Once again, this is Refocus Radio, and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Tom French. Like I always want to say to you, thank you for your time.
And Shemaiah, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure and nice to meet you.